Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be interviewing Mike Berry. He is the former director of sustainable business at the UK retailer Marks and Spencer. Our interview is taking place over Zoom with myself in Brazil and Mike in the US. So it is. We expect that you will have the odd issue with sound. And thank you so much for bearing with us through this interview. So, hello, Mike. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you very clearly, Jane. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. So, Mike, would you be happy to make a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure, I'm Mike. Led the sustainability journey at Marks and Spencer for 19 years, and also worked at the Consumer Goods Forum, bringing together the world's biggest food and drink companies to work together on sustainability issues such as plastics, food waste, deforestation, and human rights issues in supply chains as well. Loved every minute of it. Came out of Marks and Spencer last summer. Now working freelance, helping businesses prepare for a very, very different decade ahead.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Well, in this interview, we're going to talk about your learnings, your experience, and your recommendations for other companies that are navigating through this challenging area of responsible sourcing of soy. Well, we know that soy has undergone a massive expansion over the last 20 years. And there are some concerns about the links between soy production and deforestation, human rights abuses, and the loss of unique landscapes. And in response to that, Proforest, in partnership with WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and JEF, the Global Environment Facility, developed the Soy Toolkit, which is basically a framework to help companies to navigate through this wide range of tools. It's a capacity building program, and the idea is to help companies to implement their responsible sourcing policies in relation to soy. The idea is to offer some tools in a context to help companies to identify risks and also to take action in order to deliver on their commitments. So, getting started now, Mike, with the questions for you. So, as a member of the Global Resource Initiative Task Force, what are your priorities in reducing the impact of UK supply chains on climate and environment?
Well, it's very simple, Jen. Stop deforestation in global supply chains. I mean, the Global Resource Initiative has been a really important coming together of policymakers, NGOs, and big business as well to co create the system that we need for the next decade to eradicate deforestation from UK supply chains. So, whether that's soy, whether it's palm oil, whether it's cocoa, whether it's cattle, those global supply chains, which to many UK citizens and also UK retailers and businesses are quite invisible, quite opaque as to what's happening several thousand miles away across the other side of the world. The GRI stepped into that vacuum and said something has to happen. The world's forests are burning. In part, we're responsible as UK consumers for that. We have to stop it. We can't stop it on our own. We have to work in partnership, not just within the UK, but globally as well. So for me, the GRI is really, really important, but it's all about stopping deforestation.
And what would you say the role of soy is in this agenda specifically?
Well, through the good work of organisations like WWF, we've identified that there are 7 key commodities that are driving deforestation around the world,
Mhm.
of which soy is critically important. Now, there's been a lot of scrutiny, rightly, of palm oil and its implications for deforestation in Southeast Asia. I think the soya issue has been a little less well understood because it's quite an invisible ingredient to a lot of people. The vast
Mhm.
majority is going into animal feed. People eat the meat, they don't realise that behind it is often soy that's there in the feed. So it's been quite a complex issue to drive change for, but soy is right at the heart of the deforestation challenge that we've got globally, including UK consumption, and that the Global Resource Initiative wants to solve.
And being a complex issue, what would you say are the main challenges that industry need to overcome in order to make sustainable soy and deforestation-free soy the mainstream?
Well, the GRI's work's identified several different things that have got to work in partnership together to drive the
Mhm.
change we need. Some of this is about due diligence, making sure that all British businesses that put products on the marketplace have a clear responsibility for understanding deforestation risk in the supply chain and working to eradicate it. So there has to be due diligence in there. The second thing is then transparency, actually understanding where your raw material is coming from, understanding where you need to make interventions to drive change, And that's still a rarity for many of these commodities for
Yeah.
many British businesses. The third thing is then capacity building, making sure that we're working across the supply chains to ensure that people are not just doing it because there is a policy or a rule, though those are necessary, but because they're actually bought into understanding why keeping forests standing is so important and the steps that we can take to keep them standing. And then fourth is the jurisdictional bit that says very humbly, the British government has to work with other national governments around the world to ensure that they've got the right policy systems to keep forests standing, the right enforcement and regulation to protect those forests as well. So this is not about the UK quixotically trying to solve the world's problems on its own. It's about partnership within Britain and partnership on a global basis as well.
Yeah, and talking a little bit about the this challenges that you also faced when you were working at M&S, can you tell us a little bit more about what were the main learnings that you and your team had during the period that you were with them?
So first and foremost, it's actually understanding where you're using these raw materials. I mean, I remember us starting on timber initially before we moved on to palm or moved on to soy. And Marks and Spencer was putting thousands of products on the marketplace made of timber. Now, some of that was very obvious. It was furniture. You could understand that. But clothing, many pieces of clothing, maybe 10% it contains cellulosic fibers made from wood. Then you had the wood constructing the buildings in marketing literature, in paper letters that were sent to consumers, in packaging. So wherever you looked, M&S had this very large and often invisible timber footprint around the world. So once we knew where we're using it in the business, you can then start to track and trace it back through several stages of the supply chain. The company making the product you put on the marketplace, the raw material
Hmm.
source, the
Yeah.
actual producer back in the field. So all the time tracing back from what you put onto the market all the way back to the source was a huge challenge. Now, 10, 15 years ago, that was just an incredible complex mix of spreadsheets. It was Excel spreadsheets everywhere.
Yeah.
It's really hard. As we've moved now to a world of artificial intelligence and big data, you can start to automate these track and trace systems. But first and foremost, it was a challenge of what is my footprint? And then the second great challenge is once you know your footprint, how does tiny little Marks and Spencer, just turning over £10 billion a year, spec in the UK economy, let alone the global economy, drive the change that needs to happen on the other side of the world when M&S is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction what's actually bought from a forest? And only by working together with other good businesses like Tesco's and Sainsbury's, Walmart, with Carrefour, with Metro, with Nestle, with Unilever, could you possibly drive the leverage that you needed to drive change in those supply chains? So footprint first, and then building the scale to actually drive change.
Yeah, yeah, and this one of the challenges that you mentioned as well is around capacity building, and yeah, the Soy Toolkit is precisely about building capacity, and this comes from an understanding that we had that in many companies there is usually a disconnect between the decision makers at the headquarters and people that really need to implement things on the ground at the local offices. How would you say are some good practices or some tips to try to overcome this challenge of building capacity in local teams and also in headquarters?
Jen, it's a brilliant point, and it is all about capacity building. I mean, first you have to start with the right institutional rules on a government level, and then at a business level, you have to have your sourcing policy, your standards, your audits, and your checks to make sure that things happen. But that only takes you so far, because if people don't understand why there is a rule, they'll either ignore it or just partially implement it, or do it in the wrong way. When people are truly invested in this is the necessity of protecting forests, this
Yeah.
is what I need to do to protect forests. This is why things are better if we protect forests for my business and me individually. People go the extra mile, they do more than the actual rule required. So that capacity building is incredibly important. And again, across these complex, multiple different supply chains, when very few different players in the supply chain actually know who each other are, it's very difficult to build a common approach to capacity building. So what things like the Soy Toolkit do is it enable you to have one conversation that goes down consistently through multiple levels in the supply chain. And it means that whenever somebody else starts that conversation, not just Marks and Spencer, but Tesco, Sainsbury's, other good businesses, the same consistent message and capacity building goes back as well. Everybody
Mm.
wins together. So capacity building is critical for this.
And once the capacity building challenge is overcome, what would be the main next steps that you would recommend companies could take in order to make sure that implementation of their commitments is robust?
So it's again, all this is about consistency across the marketplace. So
Hmm.
I've seen so many times when one or two businesses step forward, but not 10 or 20, it's very difficult to move things. So the first thing you've got to do as a business, once you've got your own house in order and your own supply chain due diligence in place and capacity building in place, you have to encourage the rest of the marketplace, you're often your competitors, to come on the journey with you. That's the first thing. The second thing is also very uncomfortable business, not just working with your competitors, but starting to work to encourage change on a political level. And a lot of businesses try and avoid getting involved with politics for the right reason. You know, we're businesses, we have no right to get involved
Yeah.
with telling society what rules to have. But actually, Marks and Spencer, no business can actually create a stable supply chain around the world without institutional capacity in the producing country as well. Now, we have to be very humble in terms of how we ask for change of national governments, very careful. So, again, the second thing is to have a political voice with a small p, not a big P, but a small p, a very
Hmm.
humble voice that explains to governments why it's important to me putting products on the marketplace, that it's produced to high standards in the producing country as well. So those are the two big things I think businesses need to do: overcome competition concerns, overcome political concerns. And that's again what the Global Resource Initiative did by bringing together business, policymakers, and NGOs together to co-create the solution.
Yeah, no, this is, yeah, we're coming up to the end of our time, but this is super valuable insights. Many thanks, Mike. And I think this will be super helpful for other companies that are going through the same journey of implementing their commitments and also making sure that they contribute positively to the sustainable sourcing of commodities, including soy. Before we end, I would like to let you know that we are offering trainings free of charge as part of the Soy Toolkit. And this could be useful for different companies that are also trying to implement and making efforts to implement their responsible sourcing commitments in relation to soy.